We're at page 26 of Al-Baqarah, verses 170. As you're finding the page, we did the Qunut dua, the Prophet ﷺ, whenever there was a tragedy in the Ummah or calamity, he would make this kind of dua, seeking Allah's help for those who passed away or those who are dealing with the difficult hardships. So in following the Sunnah, inshallah, we need dua for those in Palestine and Gaza as they're going through this difficult time. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذا قيل لهم اتبعوا ما أنزل الله قالوا بل نتبع ما ألفينا عليه آباءنا أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعقلون شيئا ولا يهتدون. ومثل الذين كفروا كمثل الذي ينعق بما لا يسمع إلا دعاء ونداء صم بكم عمي فهم لا يعقلون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات رزقناكم واشكروا لله إن كنتم إياه تعبدون. إنما حرم عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير وما أهل به لغير الله فمن اضطر غير باغ ولا عاد فلا إثم عليه إن الله غفور رحيم. إن
الذين يكتمون ما أنزل الله من الكتاب ويشترون به ثمنا قليلا أولئك ما يأكلون في بطونهم إلا النار ولا يكلمهم الله يوم القيامة ولا يزكيهم ولهم عذاب أليم أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى والعذاب بالمغفرة فما أصبرهم على النار ذلك بأن الله نزل الكتاب بالحق إن الذين اختلفوا في الكتاب لفي شقاق بعيد
الحمد لله. First ayah. وإذا قيل لهم اتبعوا ما أنزل الله قالوا بل نتبع ما ألفينا عليه آباءنا. When it is said to them to follow what was revealed from Allah, they say, no, we're going to follow what was given to our forefathers. أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعقلون شيئا. Even if their forefathers didn't understand anything, ولا يهتدون, and they were not guided. A lot of times people say this because it's easy to use as an excuse to not submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because it's not really the fact that they're comfortable with following what their fathers followed, but it is merely following their desires and using that as the forefront. Because if you really want to follow your forefathers, then you go all the way back to Ibrahim alayhi salam and Adam alayhi salam. So you're picking and choosing which forefather you want to follow in order so that it can mask your desire for haram. And so Allah then compares them, and in Quran you find two kinds of comparisons. You find something called tashbih and tamthil. The tashbih is when you compare something at the micro level, and the tamthil is something where you're comparing concepts. It's not identical when you compare it, but you're saying this is like this. And so here we find the example of the latter, where Allah is saying, وَمَثَلُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, and the likeness of those who disbelieve, كَمَثَلِ الَّذِي يَنْفِي مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ إِلَّا دُعَاءً وَنِدَاءً. The one who disbelieves, and this is a particular kind of disbeliever, his likeness is like the one who doesn't hear except calls and cries. Dua is something you call softly, and nida is something loudly. And so he's just hearing noises, but he's not understanding. And then it is compared to the one who is summun, bukmun umyun. He's deaf, he is mute, and he is blind. Deafness was mentioned first because the primary way of receiving guidance is listening. And that's why you see, for example, Qawmu Nuh, when they refuse to listen to Nuh, they put their fingers in their ears. They don't want to even hear the guidance. When people were traveling to Mecca, the Quraysh would say to the newcomers, to the outsiders, don't listen to Muhammad ﷺ, because listening is the first reception of guidance. So Allah is saying they can't hear. They hear cries and these kinds of noises, but it's just noise for them. There's no understanding of what that is. Bukmun, they're mute or dumb, And عمي, they're blind. They can't see no matter what. فهم لا يعقلون. They don't understand. And this is, you see, in the case of family members, who maybe, you tell them this is haram, don't engage in this. And to them, it's like just cries and just speaking. There's no understanding. It doesn't penetrate the heart. This comes from continuous disobedience. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that those who continue to rebel, what happens is a black dot enters their heart, slowly covering the heart. And then Allah compares it to rust. He says, كَلَّا بَرَّانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. What they earned was a rust over their heart, a seal. That seal is like the example of the cup flipped upside down. You can keep pouring and pouring, but nothing will ever enter. And that's why they usually like to change the subject. Don't talk to me about that. I heard that. I understand. I know what I'm doing. They don't want to hear it. It's nothing for them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compares them to these sorts of, and He compares it to the shepherd who's calling, a sheep, a flock of sheep. And the sheep don't understand, They're just hearing noises. They don't know what the words mean. And the shepherd's saying, hey, and to them, it's just noise. And so they are unable to discern from what it really matters. And that is because of what they earn themselves. Allah then subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, and this is the ayah that gives us the underlying reason of why it is that they ended up this way. Allah says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O you who believe, kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum. Eat from the good things that we provided you. Washkuru lillah. And be grateful to Allah in kuntum iyyahu ta'budun. If it is Him you truly, some translations say worship, but worship is not the complete meaning. It is, if it is Him, are enslaved to. Enslaved to. So here, what's the problem? Allah is telling us, when you're not grateful for what Allah has provided from the tayyibat, from the good things, the halal things, it's not enough for you. So you start looking elsewhere. You look at the haram things. So you're saying, it's not enough for me to have such and such, what Allah has provided me. I have to now seek other things that are haram. And so this indulgence in haram causes you to turn a blind eye when guidance comes. You're so entrenched with getting money. You're so entrenched with women. You're so entrenched with all the desires that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set as traps of the dunya. And all you are thinking about is those things. You don't let guidance penetrate your heart. And then what do you say? We're following the forefathers. So that's your excuse that you can use without feeling guilty. Oh, this is how my father did it, and that's how I'm going to do it. And this is particularly related to idol worship. They used to say that the idols were something that my father did. So if you're saying I'm going to hellfire, then that means my father's going to hellfire. They will use this narrative to talk back to the Prophet ﷺ. But what they don't understand, it's not about idol worship. Idol worship was a source of economy for them. They understood that the first person, Amr ibn Luhay, who was from Bani Khuza'a, when Khuza'a was taken over, they took over Jurhum and they conquered Mecca. During this time, Amr ibn Luhay went to Sham. He went to the Levant area. He found that over there in the Roman controlled areas of the Arabs, they had all these idols, and they would explain to them, this idol brought this fortune, this idol. And he saw that their society was developed and progressive. So he said, yes, that's what probably is the source of their success. So he brought Hubal, which is the first idol he brought back to Mecca, and he began the idol worship. The Prophet ﷺ later saw him in a dream. He says, I saw this Amr ibn Luhay, even though it's been hundreds of years. He says, I saw him dragging his intestine in the fire. This is a terrible punishment. But this idols, what happened was, it became a source for people to travel to Mecca, pay homage to the idols, and Quraysh was profiting from this. And so it was a front, a religious front, but really behind the scenes, it's money, it's economy, it's power, it's prestige. That's all it's about. And Allah talks about that in the Quran. He says they took them as idols so that they couldn't be superior in society, only because of that. And you see, anytime there's idol worship, people are not religious at all. It's always something to do with desires or lusts. So Allah is saying the problem will happen once you stop being grateful. Once you stop being grateful, your eyes are going to go after all these things, and you're going to be misguided, and your heart will be sealed, and then guidance can enter. Allah says, إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَيْتَةَ. These are the things Allah made haram. the carcass or the dead, والدم and the blood, ولحم الخنزير and the meat of the pork, the swine, وما أهل به لغير الله and anything that has been sacrificed besides Allah. فمن اضطر غير باغ ولا عاد فلا إثم عليه. But if someone is forced to do so because of their condition and necessity of some sort, there is no sin upon that person. You know, you're hungry, you're in the middle of nowhere, you're about to die. Go ahead and do what you have to do. Inna Allah ghafur rahim. Allah is merciful, He is forgiving. Now here you can see, we can count on one hand what Allah made haram. And the reality is, in this dunya, you will see a lot of things are halal, and only a few things are haram. So why do we tend to, get into the business of selling pork? Why do we use that excuse? I need to make money. Allah has made so many things, but it is a mindset. Allah has, the shaitan has made you focus on those things that are haram. Same thing with the Adam alayhi salam. Allah says you can have anything in this Jannah. Just don't come near this one tree. Doesn't matter what kind of tree it is. The objective was, when Allah makes halal for you, He makes it in abundance. You can't count it. You can't even list it. But with the haram things, He's listing it for you because it's just a few things. But subhanAllah, how shaitan gets your paradigm shifted to thinking that I need this haram. There's no other way I can make money except through liquor. There's no other way I can make money except through this. He changed your idea of what is available and what's not, even though there's an abundance. And subhanAllah, I mentioned this before, they did an experiment. They did an experiment in a school where a teacher brought the students and she had a white piece of paper. And in that white piece of paper, there was a circular black dot in the middle. And she asked them to describe what they saw. And most of them, in fact, a good amount of them, they said, we see a black dot. And then she said to them after the exercise was done, how come you didn't see the white around the black dot? The brain is trained that way, to look at that black dot, to look at the things that are haram, to look at the things that are not there in your life. But when you look really deep, open your peripheries and you see there's so much things around that you do have, so much things that are available for you and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been made available for us. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَكْتُمُونَ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ. Those who hide what Allah has revealed from the book, from the kitab, وَيَشْتَرُونَ بِهِ ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا, and they purchase this kind of trade with a small price. أُولَٰئِكَ مَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ إِلَّا النَّارِ. They don't eat in their stomachs, or they don't put in their stomachs except fire. وَلَا يُكَلِّمُهُمُ اللَّهُ, and Allah will not look at them. يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, on the day of judgment. وَلَا يُزَكِّيهِمْ, and He will not purify them. وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ, and they will have a terrible punishment. This is related to, what you have to understand. When you're buying something or you're eating something that's haram, you're putting a piece of fire in your belly. And the Prophet ﷺ used the same example when he was saying, when two people come to me to seek judgment, one may talk better than the other. He may present his argument better than the other. And I'm only going to judge by what I see, by what I hear. But it may be that the other person is the correct one, but he wasn't able to articulate it. He says, but no, if I make a judgment, I'm a human being. Whoever is really wrong, and people know between each other who was the one that was wrong, is taking a piece of fire. Meaning, if I give the judgment to him, that's fine. He may get away with it in this dunya, but let him know he's taking a piece of fire with him. And so you have to understand, when we deal with haram money, when we consume haram things, what we're doing is putting in our stomachs haram things. And especially those who change the book of Allah in order to fit the desires of the people. Some people like to, especially with regards to rulers and people like that who like to change the laws, and they will find these kind of religious clerics to do the job. Like Henry, I believe King Henry from England, he wanted, in his religion, he couldn't marry, but because he wanted to have another wife, he changed the whole religion, and he found people to do it because it's just a cheap price. And they may have been given a big amount of money, but comparison to the hereafter, it's very small. And so Allah then says He will not talk to them on the day of judgment. This is a huge punishment. And He will not purify them, and they will have a terrible punishment. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ اشْتَرَوُا الضَّلَالَةَ بِالْهُدَى. These are the people who exchange guidance for misguidance. وَالْعَذَابَ بِالْمَغْفِرَةِ. And they change forgiveness with punishment. فَمَا أَصْبَرَهُمْ عَلَى النَّارِ. What is going to make them patient or when they're in the fire? Allah is saying, how can they do this? What is going to help them in that time of need when they're going to be burning in the fire of Jahannam? ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ نَزَّلَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ. This is because Allah has sent the book with the truth. With truth. And we spoke about this. Truth is the ultimate balance. Truth is equivalent to justice. So justice is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this world in truth, which means He made it in balance. So when you corrupt the truth, when you remove from the truth, you're causing imbalance, which leads to chaos and havoc and mischief. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this Allah has sent down this book with truth. وَإِنَّ الَّذِينَ اخْتَلَفُوا فِي الْكِتَابِ. And those who differ in the book, لَفِي شِقَاقٍ بَعِيدٍ. They themselves are on weak footing. They are doubtful of themselves. When they do these things, they're always guilty. They always try to cover up. They always try to make excuse, because now they remove themselves from that moral footing. What is right, what is truth. Whenever you start living a life of lies and haram, you're never comfortable. You're never solid. You're always worried. And so why would you want to live a life like that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is indirectly saying. So this is the page, inshallah, that we completed. We will do next week, inshallah. Very beautiful page that will talk about bir, righteousness. Subhanallah bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. If there's any comments or suggestions or questions, inshallah, we can take them now. And I just want to mention, when these things made haram, it was very hard for them. But it's not hard for us. But for them, you could imagine, they don't have freezers. They don't have halal shops. So now you've eliminated most of what they were able to eat. Meaning, if they found a dead animal, can eat that. Where they used to be able to eat pork, can eat that. For us, it's different. But for them, it was very hard. And they still were able to immediately follow, because their heart was open. They were ready to receive whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger revealed. So always leave your heart open. Always don't fixate yourself on a desire or culture. Don't make your love for tradition and culture obsessive. Once it becomes obsessive, it takes priority over religion. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, if you are truly grateful and if you are enslaved to Him, meaning not just worship Him, but you really apply His laws. That at the time of inheritance, you apply Sharia. In the time when there's dispute, you know who's the arbiter. You go to a sheikh and you look at the book of Allah as your source of mediating these situations. This is truly enslavement. It's not just worship like the Christians do, and then they separate the laws from the worship. No, we are enslaved to Him, and that is a true sign of gratitude. Jazakumullah khair, inshallah. Inshallah, have breakfast with Brother Arif now.